Welcome, everyone. Should we go to the next slide, Jessa?
Yeah. All right, so welcome again to our White Coats for Black Lives series on personal statement writing. We're really excited to talk about the writing process and answer any questions you guys might have. Just a reminder, this is the mission of White Coats and what we're striving to do. And let's see, here's our introduction. We introduced ourselves already a little bit, but again, I'm Jessa. I'm a second year med student at the JMP Joint Medical Program. A little bit about me, I'm originally from San Luis Obispo County, and I'm really interested in early childhood intervention work, as well as like food systems and decolonizing food systems work. I'll pass it to Ria.
Yeah, so I'm Ria, she, her pronouns mentioned already, and I'm second year at the JMP. And Jessa and I are both in Prime, which is program, oh my gosh, do I know what Prime stands for? Program in Medical Education for underserved.
Urban underserved.
Urban or underserved. Okay, we got it.
A lot of acronyms, too many acronyms.
Yeah. And I'm interested in community and abolitionist organizing. And I'm also first generation to go to college.
All right, we'll skip over these. These are our founders, our team, our wonderful fellows who we would not be here without. And yeah, so let's get started. So the personal statement. Today we're going to talk about just kind of the nuts and bolts of the personal statement and what's asked of us. We're going to do a little bit of a reflection activity just to get the juices flowing on what you might be wanting to think about for the personal statement. And then we'll definitely leave time for Q&A. And lastly, would love your feedback on how the session went today. This is an overwhelming slide, so just take it for face value. Basically, we want to show that we're here right now in the time of preparing the primary app, kind of like finishing your classes, continuing with the experiences that you're currently working on, if that's volunteer, clinical, etc. And as we know, the primary application for med school, if you're applying this cycle, is due at the end of May, June-ish. I haven't checked the actual date. And so this is really a good-ish time to start thinking about the personal statement, which is part of that primary application. Obviously, like there's no right time to start, or there's no like specific timeline which you should be writing. So if you haven't started or you hadn't thought about it, no worries at all. But just to give you a sense of kind of where we are in the overview of things.
So this is the AMCAS prompt that you get for the personal statement. And you have 5,300 characters to respond to these questions, which are: why have you selected the field of medicine? What motivates you to learn more about medicine? What do you want medical schools to know about you that hasn't been disclosed in other sections of the application? And you can also include information about unique hardships, challenges, or obstacles that may have influenced your educational pursuits. And they also invite, if people want to share about fluctuation in academic record that isn't explained in other places, the personal statement is a place to address those things. And the key here is to tell your story and your narrative. And we can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, this is you.
Yeah, just building off of that. Just acknowledging, like upfront, it is really hard, or it can be really hard to write a personal statement. How do you like summarize your whole life and everything that's felt really important to you in your story in like a succinct way that demonstrates why you want to be in medicine and why you're going to be a phenomenal doctor? And so I think, what we hear often in terms of how to do this is like showing your story, not telling your story. So instead of saying like, I am compassionate, or I like to work with people, like really fleshing that out and like what what does that mean to you and what does that look like? Like, what did you feel like when you were working with a patient, or like serving in X capacity in this community, et cetera, like really getting kind of to the nitty gritty there. So yeah, anecdotes of meaningful experiences. For this third bullet point, I think, of course you're writing a personal statement because you want to be a doctor, but I think there's, more you can say around like what your goals are with that MD, like the end goal. It's, great to be a doctor, but then like, how are you going to use that? And like, what are you going to do for communities, and how are you going to give back with it? So making sure to kind of prioritize that, like the MD isn't the end goal. It's like the what comes after is. Yeah, and we can get a little bit more into that.
Some general logistics to keep in mind. So the personal statement is what is sent to all the schools that you apply to. And the secondaries are where you can be more specific to the responses to schools. And you want to think about not repeating information that you've already shared in other parts of your application, like the activity section or the disadvantaged status response, which we'll talk about a little later. So you want to use like the full breadth of all the places are that you can express yourself and what you want to share about yourself. And keeping your audience in mind, to keep the language simple and using just general grammar as you would. So using like Grammarly or some other grammar tool, and having people to copy edit your personal statement will also be helpful.
All right, so what are they not looking for? Again, the list of activities, like we know that y'all have done so much like already, and like the personal statement is again a place to like show the why of medicine. And sometimes the best way to do that is not by like listing out everything that you've done, even though we know that you've done so much. And the good part is there is a very explicit spot for those who haven't looked over the primary application, but there is a whole area for you to basically list out your activities. So keep that in mind. And just to go a little bit into that, you'll have 15 entries where you can talk about your activities, your work, your research, your volunteer experiences. You have 700 characters, which isn't all that much. I think that adds up to like 4 or 5 sentences for each. So keep that in mind. But 3 of those, you get an additional amount of characters to talk about why those 3 experiences are meaningful to you. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a sense of like, you have this space to talk about your activities. And if there's something that doesn't make it into your personal statement that you're like, I really, I want them to know that I did this, you can leave it for the activities, and that's totally great. That shouldn't be a problem. And here's an example of what the activity entry looks like. So you can, put in what the type of experience is, the hours, the dates, and that's about as much space you have to describe what exactly it is. And I'm kind of rushing through this. We can definitely come back to this, but this is really just to give you a sense of like the other spaces that you have. And this is an example of, as I mentioned, there's 3 of those 15 can be meaningful experience entries. So you have a little bit more characters to describe those experiences. And this is an example of that extra space that you get. All right, so I feel like we've covered this. Yeah, I mean, a lot at the end of the day, like you're making a case for why you want to be a physician and why you're going to make an excellent physician. And again, it's part of like telling a story. I think this is Ria.
Yeah, so writing the personal statement can be really daunting, and it can be really difficult to write about life experiences, and that can be vulnerable and feel challenging. This is an opportunity to share your authentic self, and we are a lot more than what we share on the personal statement or in these applications. And so remember that you have the agency um, to give your own narrative and to choose what you do and don't want to share. And we want to encourage you to come to talk about difficult life events, if that's something you choose to do, from a strengths-based perspective. And some of the things you can focus on in sharing difficult life events is, what did you learn from those events? What skills did you gain? If it's very valid that things in our life impact our grades, and so giving that context and explanation, this can be a place to do that. And also, sometimes difficult life events are what lead us to make the decisions that we do about becoming a physician. So this is an opportunity to share that as well. And I think just also generally that the application process can make you feel fixated on evaluating yourself or comparing yourself to other people. And so that is really not the goal of this process. And that can be real harmful. To comparing ourselves to other people can be harmful to our relationship to ourselves. So um, I encourage everyone to also think about what are affirming practices that you can have with yourself to support yourself in this process. And how can you center your purpose? The application shouldn't take us away from what our purpose is, but bring us closer to sharing our purpose and our journey with admissions.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Ria. That's such a good point. Like reiterating, like we're so much more than what's on the application and what makes it there. And we really do have agency over what we choose to share and don't share. And so I hope that feels like somewhat empowering in a process that perhaps isn't all that empowering. Yeah. So wanted to give you guys an example of an introduction. We have a couple of different examples, but I think I'll give you about 30 seconds to read this one, and then we can talk about it. All right, yeah, just thanks, Ria, for sharing the prompt in the chat. So in thinking about, why did you select the field of medicine? What motivates you to learn more? What do you want med schools to know about you? Um, Feel free to drop into the chat like things that you're noticing that speak to those prompts. You can also just think to yourselves, but definitely welcome any participation. Um, yeah, and then I can highlight a few things. Okay, I'll highlight a few things. So for this, I think, going back to telling us or, showing your story instead of telling, I think for this example, really getting into the kind of here and now of being at a school and working with families. Um, I think what's also helpful is like, showing how working with families has like brought a deeper understanding of all of the barriers that families and patients come against when it comes to accessing their health. And then underlined kind of at the end is like, we're telling the story in the paragraph and then we're wrapping it up with like, here's the main conclusion. This is, what we're trying to get from this paragraph, which is, the barriers that families face. As our introduction. We'll go to another example.
Yeah, I remember it was really helpful to me when people, when I was applying, when people shared their personal statements, it made it feel a little easier to approach. And so I hope that that's what this does for you all too. And we're not sharing these as like model examples, but just like this is what this is how we've talked about our experiences. So here, yeah, I'll give you all 30 seconds to read this, and then we can talk about it. Okay, would anyone like to unmute and share some thoughts on what do you think this addresses from the prompts or what it doesn't?
I think it shows a lot of how people interact and exposes like their exposure to different socioeconomic statuses and how communities are built and how people are able to share. Like, oh, have problems with this, but like then they could see that their parents are able to help those other peoples and how that may have impacted them and what they wanted to do in the future. And then they extended that to like in the second paragraph how it's again healthcare in their own family.
Yeah, thank you so much for those insights. Those were the components that I was trying to express in this, like learning early on about like collective care and understanding how socioeconomic status affects health, and those as like foundational experiences for interest in medicine. Yeah. And then, so the first two examples we shared were the first were ones that we wrote in our personal statement, and then next we also have some that other people in white coats have written and shared. And for these, we'll let you all read it and digest it.
All right, I'm gonna keep us moving. I know we're skipping kind of the center of the essay, but we figured we'd kind of cover some of the higher yield intro and conclusion. So for the conclusion, wanted to share some examples as well. So we'll give you time to read this one. Does anyone have any questions coming up for them as they're reading either the introduction or conclusions, or just thoughts that they want to share?
As questions come up, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll also have time later. I wanted to share what was helpful for me when I wrote my personal statement in terms of structuring it, was thinking about three-ish key examples or stories that I wanted to share. Or if there were some like similar experiences, I like grouped them into one paragraph. So thinking about like a 5-paragraph structure, because that's about how much space you have. Intro, intro can be like a foundational experience or story that you want to share, that I think you can think about as a hook, and then sharing 2 or 3 additional stories after that. And after each story and example, it's really important to give your reflection of why was that important for me? What impact did that have? The storytelling combined with the reflection is really powerful to illustrate your narrative. And sometimes you feel like, oh, that's obvious. I think they can understand that, like, this is how that impacted me, or like, that's why I care about this now. But really saying it in your own words and illustrating that is really important. And if you think about that skeleton of like 3 stories, 3 reflections, and then a conclusion paragraph, that can feel a little bit easier to approach, to as you build up that skeleton. So for this example, I'm wondering if someone would like to unmute and share what works well with this paragraph, what doesn't work well, what do you think it illustrates?
Hello. So
Thank
yeah, for this paragraph, I just really like how the person is bringing it home to the reason why they want to become a physician. And they're highlighting this time, like, the importance of like what they can bring to the table in regards to just closing that gap for healthcare disparities. And I really like the ending specifically. It's kind of having like a call to action, like this is my goal and this is how I want to have an impact. Yeah, that's kind of what I noticed from it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and there really is a invitation in the conclusion and the narrative that you share about yourself to like share the visions that you have for this field that we're all going to be a part of, and what we want to see be different in that, and what is the role that we want in making the changes. Um, Making the changes that we want to see, um, and and that's an invitation to all of you to also, articulate that in your personal statement, because you bring a lot of strengths to the field of medicine, and your unique perspective and your unique skill sets and lived experiences are what we need to transform medicine. And we'll share another example.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you talk, Ria, because I had a very similar approach for when I was writing mine, where I ended up talking about 3 different kind of buckets or different stories, and then trying to weave them together in a conclusion that, like, I don't know, trying to find common themes between things that seem very different and like wrap them all up in a conclusion, which can feel hard. In my case, I was talking about like being in like public health and global health and not really pre-med for my undergrad experience, and then dealing with like a chronic disease diagnosis, and then working at an elementary school, and like all of how all of those have kind of shaped my interest in coming into this path. And so, you know, definitely had my work cut out for me in trying to like wrangle all three of those under one umbrella. And this was my conclusion. I don't think I really loved it. And I think maybe that's a perhaps good thing to like take away from today, is like, I don't know if there's ever a final draft of your personal statement. This is just kind of like where I landed at the end of May and was like, you know, this is good enough and I'm going to just submit it. And so this was kind of like one way that I tried to tie all these together. Not sure if it's super, clear with just this paragraph outside of the whole personal statement. But this is just one example. And then this is our last example.
So these are kind of, you know, summarizing and alluding to the things that people will have talked about earlier in their personal statement. And in the conclusion, you want to tie all of those components together and kind of share your mission statement. I see there's a question from Ruth.
Hello, yes. I'm sorry I missed the intro, so maybe this question was answered before, but I I hear this advice that's like show, don't tell, right? And you want to give descriptive examples of your narrative. But I've noticed in the conclusion, it's kind of like you're bringing back those narratives, but this time you're telling, like you're being very explicit on what you want. So is the concluding paragraph in a way the part where you straight out just like do the part where you tell because you've already shown in the body paragraphs beforehand?
Yeah. So the concluding paragraph doesn't have to be like another story or another showing. And that can be one place where you tie in those stories. I think you can think of it as a extended reflection. In the summation of all these experiences that you've had, what are your reflections from those experiences and where do they lead you to? In terms of medicine and beyond. And so it's okay to not have, I mean, I don't know how you can have another story in your concluding paragraph. I'm sure people have done it, but like I think it's totally okay to have just reflections.
Yeah. And to build
So-
on that, because I see there's kind of a similar question in the chat. I think, you know, you can include it in your personal statement an activity that you've already listed, obviously, in your activities. Like we're talking about the things that have shaped our decision into going into medicine, and that's probably going to be one of the activities that you've done. And so, like, for example, for me in my activities section, I'll name like, I worked in elementary school for a couple of years, and these were my hours, and these were my projects that I did in very resume style. And then in my personal statement, I'm going to write about, you know, perhaps like one really like meaningful interaction I had with a parent, or like a space that I held for parents and teachers where we talked about like different health programs and trying to figure out how to meet them, you know, where they're at, and then tying that back to medicine and why it's important to do that. And so like there's a little bit extra step when it comes to the personal statement to like show and reflect on those kind of more impactful stories, if that makes sense. And you'd be surprised, like a lot of things, you can kind of make a case for so many different things to be related to medicine, like even like, I don't know, small interactions that seem small, but then like it's all kind of how you break it down and analyze it. And perhaps it's helpful to think about like, you know, what do you want to show in this personal statement? Do you want to focus on like your level of empathy, like your commitment to your community, or like your commitment to health justice and health equity? And through the stories that you tell, you know, you can say like, I don't know if I'm describing this well, but you can show how you got there through that story, and then just say like at the end, like, and this, like on reflection of this story, I realized that X, like I realized that this really mattered for this patient. And now I have this understanding as a like future physician that I want to carry with me in my back pocket. Things like that. I hope that makes sense, and can talk about that better in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'll just also quickly respond to Layla's question in the chat as well. And Jessa said this also, is that the activities that you talk about can also be like stories from those activities can be a part of your personal statement. It's not like, oh, don't acknowledge that you did these other things in your personal statement that you've written in your activity section. But you can talk about them in different ways. And another thought I had is that in the activity section, there's 3 activities that you can identify as like the most significant activities, and you get a little bit more room to write about those. That's another place for storytelling. And sometimes the descriptions for the 15 activities or however many you end up inputting, those are more resume style, where you're describing, this is what I did and this is what I was responsible for, and the ways in which you took leadership, and the role that you had in that work and the experience you gained. And in the 3 that you can write more about, storytelling is a great that is a great place for more storytelling. And what you want to avoid is like telling the same story in the activity section and in the personal statement, because that takes away the room you have to share about yourself. And let's get through. So I'll quickly talk about the disadvantage section, and then we can do Q&A. We had a reflection activity, but we'll prioritize more time for Q&A, and then introduce you all to the activity, which you can do in your own time. So the disadvantage section, so you have AMCAS allows you to self-identify as disadvantaged, and there's many things that you can, it's a self-identification, so there's many experiences that you can experiences and identities that you can address in this section, like growing up in an underserved area, being an immigrant, your immigration status, experiences of interpersonal and structural racism, economic adversity, being first generation to attend college, disability, and health conditions. So there's a really, and that's not an all-inclusive list. That's just a place of, these are the experiences that you can talk about. And similar to what we talked about with the personal statement, this is also a place for strengths-based mindset in your writing, and you have the autonomy to decide what you want to share and how you want to describe your personal narrative. And it's an opportunity to have additional space in your application to share about your life experiences and how they've affected your path to medicine, and to contextualize and frame your accomplishments. So I mentioned some examples, and again, that's not all expansive. And the goal of sharing these experiences is, at least the way I've thought about it, is to describe the distance you've traveled in your life to get to where you are, and to share your experiences through a strengths-based framework to highlight the assets that you're bringing to medicine, because you are you in a way that no one else can be you, and what that means for what you're able to do to care for your people in your community. Um, and knowing that a lot of people applying to medical school don't have, might not have the lived experiences that you do, and that is a strength and an asset. Um, and honestly, the language of calling it disadvantaged is baked in deficit thinking, which is not what these experiences are. So a while it's called disadvantaged section, and so that's what will be on the application. That's very much not what we all know to be true in the experiences that you might write about.
All right, thank you, Ria. That's really important to highlight. I think we have made it through at least what we wanted to go through slides wise. Would definitely love to see if folks have questions. Either you can raise your hand, or throw your question in the chat, and we'll try to get to everyone's questions. And if not, we have an activity to do. So, but would definitely love to just hear questions. Yeah. We definitely didn't cover everything. I'm sure you guys have questions still.
While we wait for people to think of questions, Jessica, I had a question for
Yeah.
you. How did you prioritize your self-care when you were doing the application process?
Ooh, that's such a good question. We didn't plant this either. She's actually asking me this in real time. Oh my gosh. I think that I actually didn't mind the writing part of the application process because it was so reflective. Like, it's like you've done the work, you've done the what, and now it's like, what did it mean to you? And so I think I did a lot of like journaling, which was helpful to just like flush out thoughts. And I actually found like I had a better sense of my path and like myself, not to like sound cheesy, but by the end of this process, I was like, wow, okay, there's things that are becoming clearer to me now that I've like sat down and really like thought about it. And so in that way, it like was a healing-ish process. You know, maybe the speed at which it had to happen and a few other things are not as healing, but there are some like positive aspects of like really taking this time to reflect. And besides that, I mean, yeah, definitely would just hang out with friends and take time off and respect that as time off. I'm a very like categorized person. Like I can't do two things at once. I'm like either fully off or like doing my work. And so a lot of time fully off.
There's a question about if we got feedback from people on our personal statement and who to ask to review. I was actually thinking about this in the context of self-care. I also found that in the beginning, the writing process felt really stressful to me. But getting to, I had my personal statement reviewed by two of my closest friends, and actually that process felt really nice, and I felt really supported to have help from people I loved and people who loved me to like to help me craft this, and would have ideas that like I didn't think of. So I think getting people who know you and your journey really well are really important, like first people to look at your personal statement, and people that you feel a lot of safety and security with. as the first part of looking at the application is really helpful. And then once you feel a little bit more sure in where your personal statement is at, that's when I like reached out to a professor who'd also been a mentor for several years to look at my personal statement. So I had my personal statement reviewed by 3 people, 2 friends, and a mentor.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely a threshold of like too many people, too many eyes, too much feedback. Like at the end of the day, like they're going to give you your feedback, and then you have to go back and do like draft number 10 and then another person. So I agree with like someone, like a couple of people, at least in my case, a couple of people who knew me well and who yeah, I trusted to give really helpful feedback, and we're kind of really good writers. I think that helps. I feel like they definitely gave me some good writing tips. Yeah, I see there's another. Actually, I received a question via private chat about how to focus your personal statement when you have a big public health background, and how to make it kind of clear to integrate more of like the medicine within your personal statement. And I think that's a really great question. And I imagine that other folks might be also kind of considering that. I think for me, I came from a more public health broader background. And so I had to like really emphasize that like I came from this world, and like in doing all these things, I realized at the end of the day, like I want to be working individually with people. I have found through XYZ experiences that like this is what like means the most to me, and where I think I can have an impact for XYZ reasons. And one of those reasons I can just share with y'all, like one of them was like having been a patient and having like been through that process and knowing like what it feels like to be cared for well and like effectively and like have trust in someone. And so I think that, and then you can all like also make the point of anything that you do at the individual level, like the stories that you're going to hear from patients, you can, elevate in terms of an advocacy role at the public health level. So if public health, pieces really matter to you, then you can always share that as a really big priority for you as well. But it is tricky. Like if you're from the public health world, like navigating that, like I still want to be in public health and I want to also do this clinical work. And so I think that's a good question. I hope that answered your question.
Jessa, if you could also go to the concluding paragraph example for me. I also came from a public health background, and also addressed a lot of the same things that Jessa talked about in my application. And I think just yeah, so I'll just leave that there as an example of one way that you can talk about it, to say that you like, I said, I see the value of both types of work, and I feel more fulfilled when I get to have individual relationships with people. And when I've had those experiences in the past, that's what I felt most fulfilled by. And that would be missing from like continuing a career in public health. And then another question in the chat is what are admissions expectations of like level of writing? And I think that simple and like clear writing that's in your voice and expresses your narrative in your words is what's most important. And something that will be like easily read by admissions people, because they also don't have too much time to review, to read through the application. So you wanted to make it as easy for them to read and follow as possible. And it doesn't, and people have different writing styles. And that's totally okay, I would say don't feel nervous about, that you need to bring them to tears. Just express your story and your narrative in your voice. Jessa, any more thoughts on that question?
I agree. Yeah, I don't think that they expect, like, for a lot of folks, we've been doing science related classes and like writing in a very like scientific way. And so I don't think the expectation is that you're all of a sudden like a literary genius. And so I think that that's like super reasonable as long as you're telling your story, making it clear, it's well organized, and there's no typos. I think that's a pretty solid. I will say, kind of going back a little bit in terms of feedback, if you're looking for like an extra like pair of eyes towards the end of your journey, we have a group of folks on the White Coats team that can take a look and give feedback. So I want to keep that as an offering, since I know this wasn't like a workshop where we could actually see your drafts and like work on those like with you. So I want to leave that as an offering. We can leave our emails in the chat, and feel free to follow up with us individually. Any other questions?
Should we just introduce the reflection exercise, Jessa?
Yeah. Oh, let me get
And
there.
then so getting started in writing can be difficult, and also requires a lot of reflection and thinking to plan out what you would like to write about. I've done this exercise 2 times. I'd done it like 2 times before I actually wrote my personal statement, not for the purpose of the personal statement, but I think it helped me in just my own self-reflection. And it's like drawing a life journey map, and there's no real template for it, but the goal is just for you to write or draw out significant events in your life and pivotal moments in your life. One example of how you could do it could be as a river, which is the first example on here, where like the edges of the river are the most critical moments of your life that were like turning points. What were the moments that like turned the river of your life journey? If we want to be symbolic about it, that's what it's that's what that's alluding to. And then another style is up and down, and you document and you can do that in like events over time, and what have been like highs and lows. And you can see that the up and down. So after drawing out something like that, here are just some reflection questions. If they help you in generating ideas and stories for your narrative. So you could think about how have the events in your life journey influenced your motivation and values? Who are some of the key people who have influenced you? What do the events in your life journey show you about the strengths and best parts of yourself? And what have you learned about yourself in reflecting on your life journey? So yeah, and other journaling prompts might also be helpful if you're having trouble with like getting started on writing, or yeah. Let's see, is that now we have 2 minutes, so maybe we should any questions or thoughts on this activity? Okay, yeah, just an offering if it's something that helps you to work on in your own time as you in your process of writing.
Awesome. Yay. And also, I'm not sure how many of y'all have White Coats mentors, but that's another resource to be accessing with this writing process too. And with that, I know we have 1 minute left before you head out. We would absolutely love your feedback. I'm going to launch a classic Zoom poll. Let's see if we can do this. Would love to, yeah, get your responses. Can you guys see, is it all 4 of them?
Yeah, just that's all 4.
Beautiful, thank you.
This really helps us. Please fill it out before you head out. And thank you so much. We put our emails also, so reach out. Reach out.
Yeah. Any questions you have that you didn't get answered today, feel free to email us. We're here for you guys. Yeah, and thanks for joining us. And I'll stick around for like another minute if folks have any individual questions.
Oh, Jessica, do you know where these recordings are shared?
Ooh, I don't know, but I'll ask Ayumi. I think she'll probably share them out.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. We can email slides.
I don't, for Layla's question, I don't think that Middle Eastern counts as URM. You would have to check with the AMCAS how they define and categorize URM. Also, it might be different. Some schools might also have different categorizations. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know if there might be schools that do consider it, but I'm not sure.
All right, I will end our
Thanks,
poll.
everyone.
Cool. I'm assuming the results get saved automatically, so I can just exit out of this. Or should I take screenshots? I'm gonna take
Should I?
screenshots just in case. I
Yeah.
don't trust myself.
Say that. Yeah, Layla, I definitely hear that. I would say that regardless of what the categorization is, the disadvantage statement can be a place for you to talk about your experiences and how those identities and experiences have impacted you. You got the screenshots, Jessa?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I will probably have to hop off pretty soon, but not sure if we have any lingering questions. I'm guessing no. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.